I stood in front of the mirror that morning, adjusting my tie for the 10th time. My hands were shaking, but not from nerves. It was pure happiness, the kind that makes your chest feel too small for your heart. I had waited 29 years to find someone like Ella, and in just a few hours, she would be my wife. I called my parents at 8 in the morning just to confirm they were on their way. My mother answered, and something in her voice felt off. She hesitated before saying they were getting ready. I pushed the thought aside, but when the ceremony began, 2 seats in the front row remained empty the entire time. Before we dive into the story, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Stay with me, because what my parents did 3 years later will make your jaw drop. Growing up in a 2-story house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, I always knew my place in the family hierarchy, and that place was somewhere behind my older sister, Brooke. She was 4 years older than me, and from the moment I could understand the world around me, I understood one thing clearly. Brooke was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting around her. My parents, Donald and Sandra, never tried to hide their favoritism. When Brooke got a B+ on her report card, they threw her a small celebration. When I brought home straight A grades, my father would glance at the paper and say something like, "Good job, now go help your mother with dinner." It was always like that. My achievements were footnotes in a book that was entirely about Brooke. I remember the day I got accepted into college with a full scholarship. I had worked so hard for that moment. Late nights studying, weekends spent in the library, sacrificing time with friends just to make sure my grades were perfect. When the acceptance letter came, I ran downstairs to show my parents. My mother looked at it, smiled briefly, and then turned to my father to continue their conversation about Brooke getting a promotion at her new job. That was it. No celebration, no proud moment, just a quick acknowledgement before they returned to their favorite topic. Brooke got married when I was 22. She married Tyler, a successful lawyer with a corner office and a fancy car. My parents paid for the entire wedding. They invited over 200 guests. It was held at a beautiful vineyard with flowers imported from overseas and a live band that played until midnight. I was given the task of making sure the gift table was organized and that the parking attendants had what they needed. I was essentially a staff member at my own sister's wedding. Throughout my 20s, I watched my parents pour their energy, their money, and their love into Brooke. I stopped expecting anything different. I told myself that when I built my own life, things would be different. I would create my own happiness separate from their approval. And then I met Ella. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Seattle. I had moved there for work, taking a job as a software engineer at a tech company. I ducked into a small coffee shop to escape the downpour, and that is when I saw her. She was sitting by the window reading a book with a cup of tea growing cold beside her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and when she looked up and it caught me staring, she smiled, not a polite smile, a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes. Ella had just moved to Seattle from Minneapolis. She was a nurse at a children's hospital, and she had the warmest heart of anyone I had ever met. On our first date, she asked me about my family. I told her everything. The favoritism, the feeling of being invisible, the way I always felt like I was competing for affection that was never going to be mine. She listened without judgment. She did not try to fix it or explain it away. She just listened. After that night, she said something that changed my life. She said, "Marcus, you deserve to be loved the right way, not as an afterthought, not as a backup plan, as a priority." Nobody had ever said that to me before. We dated for 2 years, 2 beautiful years of building something real. I proposed to her on top of Mount Rainier with the clouds beneath us and the sun setting in the distance. She said yes before I could even finish my sentence. When I introduced Ella to my parents, I hoped things might be different. We drove down to Portland for Thanksgiving dinner. My mother barely looked at Ella during the meal. She asked pointed questions about her background, her education, her family. My father said almost nothing. And Brooke, who was there with Tyler, pulled me aside after dinner and told me that Ella did not seem like the right fit for our family. She said Ella was too simple, too ordinary. I should have cut ties right then, but I kept hoping. I kept believing that once they saw how happy we were, once we got married, they would finally accept her. Accept us. I was wrong. The weeks leading up to our wedding were filled with excitement and careful planning. Ella and I decided early on that we would pay for everything ourselves. We did not want to owe anyone anything, especially my parents. We chose a small church on the outskirts of Seattle, a charming old building with stained glass windows and wooden pews that creaked when you sat down. We invited around 80 people, just close friends and family members who actually cared about us. I called my parents to invite them personally. My mother said they would be there. She sounded distracted, but she confirmed it. Over the following weeks, I noticed that every time I spoke to her on the phone, she would steer the conversation toward Brooke. Brooke was going through a difficult time. Tyler had been caught cheating, and they were getting divorced. My mother called me multiple times to vent about how devastated Brooke was, how unfair life was being to her, how they needed to support her through this terrible ordeal. I listened. I was patient. I expressed sympathy for my sister even though she had never shown any sympathy for me. But I also reminded my mother that my wedding was approaching, that this was an important time for me too. She would always say, "Sis, of course we will be there," and then go right back to talking about Brooke. The morning of my wedding, I woke up at 6 a.m. I could not sleep. I just lay there in the hotel bed staring at my suit hanging on the closet door. It was a simple charcoal gray suit, nothing fancy, but it was perfect. Everything about that day was supposed to be perfect. At 8 a.m, I called my parents. My mother answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was strange, tired maybe, or guilty. I asked if they were on their way. She paused for a long moment before saying they were getting ready. Something felt wrong, but I told myself I was being paranoid. This was my wedding day. Nothing could ruin it. Ella sent me a text around 10 a.m. She asked if I was happy. I typed back that this was the best day of my life, and I believed it. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. Guests began arriving around 1:30. I stood at the altar with my best friend Derek, who was my best man. We had been friends since our freshman year of college. He was the brother I never had. He leaned over and whispered, asking where my parents were. I looked at the 2 empty seats in the front row on my side of the church. I shook my head and told him I did not know. The music started. Everyone stood, and then Ella appeared at the end of the aisle. She was breathtaking. Her white dress was elegant but simple, just like her. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. Her smile was radiant, but as she walked toward me, I saw her eyes flicker to those empty seats. A shadow crossed her face just for a moment. Then she looked at me, and everything else disappeared. We exchanged our vows. We promised to love each other, to support each other, to choose each other every single day for the rest of our lives. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. But there was a hollow space in my chest where my parents should have been. After the reception, after the dancing and the toasts and the cake, I found a quiet moment alone on the balcony of our hotel. The city lights sparkled below. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was heavy with exhaustion. Before I could say anything, she started explaining. Brooke had signed the divorce papers that morning. She was falling apart. They could not leave her alone in such a fragile state. I stood there in silence, my grip tightening on the phone. I asked her if she understood what she was saying. I asked her if she realized she had missed my wedding, the most important day of my life, to sit with Brooke while she signed papers. My mother's response still echoes in my mind to this day. She said, "You have Ella now. Brooke only has us." I hung up without another word. I stood on that balcony for a long time looking out at the night sky, feeling something inside me break. The days after the wedding were a strange mix of joy and grief. Ella and I were married. We were starting our life together. But there was this wound that would not stop bleeding. My parents had made their choice, and it was not me. It had never been me. A week after we returned from our honeymoon, I sat down with Ella and told her I needed to make a decision. She held my hand and told me she would support whatever I chose. That night, I sent my parents a message. I told them I needed space. I told them that what they did was unforgivable, and I was not ready to pretend otherwise. For 3 months, I heard nothing from them. No apology, no explanation, nothing. Then out of nowhere, my mother sent me a text. It said, "I hope you will understand when you have children of your own." I did not respond. Ella and I threw ourselves into building our new life. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood outside Seattle. It had a big backyard with an old oak tree perfect for the family we dreamed of having one day. Ella continued her work at the hospital, caring for sick children with the same tenderness she showed everyone in her life. I got promoted to lead engineer at my company. We made new friends, couples who invited us over for dinner and game nights, people who showed up when they said they would. Slowly, the wound began to heal. I stopped expecting my parents to change. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I learned to grieve the relationship I had always wanted with them, the one that existed only in my imagination. 2 years after our wedding, Ella told me she was pregnant. I will never forget that moment. She handed me the test with tears in her eyes. I looked at those 2 pink lines, and I started crying too. We stood in our tiny bathroom holding each other, laughing and crying at the same time. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. We painted the nursery a soft green. We picked out a crib and a rocking chair. We chose the name Leo, if it was a boy, after Ella's grandfather who had passed away the year before. Leo was born on a warm spring morning. I was there for every moment of it, holding Ella's hand, telling her how strong she was, watching in awe as our son entered the world. When the nurse placed him in my arms for the first time, I made a silent promise. I swore that he would never feel invisible. He would never have to compete for my love. He would always know without a single doubt that he was wanted. For the first few months, our little family existed in a bubble of happiness. Sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, but so much love. I had almost forgotten about my parents entirely. Then a distant cousin posted a photo on social media congratulating us on the baby. And everything changed. My mother saw the post. She called me for the first time in nearly 3 years. I did not answer. She sent a long message saying how happy she was to have a grandchild, how she wanted to be part of Leo's life, how she hoped we could move past everything. My father sent a separate message, written in that detached tone of his, as if nothing had ever happened between us. Ella and I talked about it for hours. We were not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to keep them out forever. Another part wondered if maybe, just maybe, having a grandchild would change them. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, there was a knock at our door. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. There on our porch stood my mother, my father, and Brooke. My mother was holding a bouquet of flowers. My father had a gift bag in his hand. Brooke stood behind them with a smile that did not reach her eyes. My mother said they wanted to meet their grandson. She said families should be together. I did not want to cause a scene in front of the neighbors, so I let them in. Ella came out of the bedroom carrying Leo. Her body language changed the moment she saw who was in our living room. She held Leo a little tighter, her eyes watchful. Brooke walked toward them immediately. She reached out her arms and said, "There is my nephew, let Auntie hold him." Ella stepped back politely and said Leo was more comfortable with her right now. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. We all sat down in the living room. My mother started talking, immediately filling the silence with words about how much they had missed me, how they had been thinking about us. how they wanted to be part of Leo's life. She said she had done a lot of reflecting, and she realized she had made a mistake by missing our wedding. I listened without interrupting. Ella sat beside me, Leo asleep in her arms. My father added that family needed to stick together, especially now that there was a new generation. He said grandparents had an important role to play. Then Brooke spoke up. She said she had some free time these days and could help with babysitting. She said it in a casual tone, but there was something underneath it that made me uneasy. I finally asked the question that had been forming in my mind since they walked through the door. I asked them what they really wanted. My mother reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me and said it was a proposal. I unfolded it and started reading. My blood ran cold. The document outlined a plan for Brooke to become a secondary guardian to Leo. It proposed that she would have the right to take him every weekend. The reasoning given was that Ella worked night shifts, I traveled for work occasionally, and Leo needed a stable female figure in his life. It also mentioned that Brooke, following her divorce, needed a sense of purpose, and Leo could provide that purpose. I read it twice to make sure I understood what I was seeing. Then I looked up at my parents. Ella asked the question before I could. Her voice was calm but icy. She asked if they were seriously suggesting that our son should be used as emotional therapy for Brooke. Brooke jumped in defensively. She said she loved children and would be a wonderful second mother to Leo. She said she could give him things we could not, like stability and a strong family presence. My mother added that if we refused to cooperate, they would find another way. Something inside me snapped. I stood up and told them to leave. My mother started crying immediately, calling me cruel and ungrateful. My father raised his voice and said they had rights as grandparents, that they could take this to court if necessary. Brooke called me selfish, saying I only ever thought about myself. I told them they had lost any right to be in our lives the moment they chose Brooke over my wedding. I told them Leo was not a tool, not a project, not a way to fix my sister's broken life. He was my son, mine and Ella's. And we would protect him from anyone who saw him as anything less than a human being deserving of unconditional love. Ella stood beside me. She told them that Leo was not something to be negotiated over, and they needed to leave our home immediately. They walked toward the door. My mother turned around one last time and said we will see each other again in court. The next morning, I called a family law attorney named Patricia Huang. She came highly recommended, known for protecting parental rights and custody disputes. We met at her office downtown and I explained everything. The years of favoritism, the abandoned wedding, the surprise visit, the outrageous proposal. Patricia listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, she told us that under Washington state law, grandparents do not have automatic rights to visitation. They would have to prove that denying them access would harm the child. Given our circumstances, she said we had a strong case. She asked me to gather evidence, text messages, emails, anything that documented my parents' behavior over the years. I spent the next several days going through old conversations, printing out messages where my mother admitted they chose to stay with Brooke instead of attending my wedding. Derek agreed to provide a written statement about what he witnessed that day. 2 weeks later, the court summons arrived. My parents and Brooke had filed a petition for mandatory visitation rights. They claimed I was isolating Leo from his extended family and depriving him of important relationships. I was not surprised. I was ready. The court date came on a gray November morning. Ella and I sat on one side of the courtroom with Patricia. My parents and Brooke sat on the other side with their own attorney. Patricia presented our case methodically. She submitted the text messages, including the one where my mother wrote that they could not leave Brooke alone on my wedding day. She called Derek to the stand, and he testified about the empty seats at the ceremony, about how I had waited by the altar, not knowing if my own parents would show up. When it was Brooke's turn to be questioned, things fell apart quickly. Patricia asked her why she believed she should have custodial rights over a child she had barely met. Brooke became defensive, then angry. She accused me of turning everyone against her, of being jealous of the attention she received growing up. The judge had to ask her to calm down twice. My father was asked why he thought he deserved access to Leo after missing such a significant event in my life. He stumbled over his words, offering weak excuses about family obligations and difficult circumstances. He could not provide a clear answer. The judge took a short recess before delivering her decision. When she returned, she spoke directly and firmly. She said there was no evidence that Marcus and Ella were unfit parents. She said the petitioners had failed to demonstrate any established relationship with the child. She noted that the choice to miss a child's wedding in favor of another sibling's personal matter reflected a pattern of prioritization that did not support the claim of wanting a meaningful relationship now. The petition was denied. Ella squeezed my hand as the judge dismissed the case. We walked out of that courtroom together, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The weeks after the trial were quiet. My parents did not contact me again. No messages, no calls, no more surprise visits. Part of me grieved, not for the relationship we had, but for the one we never got to have. I realized that I had lost my parents long before that courtroom. Maybe I never really had them in the first place, but I also felt something I had not expected: freedom. I was no longer waiting for them to change. I was no longer hoping for an apology or a moment of recognition. I had stopped needing their approval, and in letting go of that need, I found peace. Ella and I focused on our little family. Leo grew bigger every day, learning to crawl, then walk, then say his first words. We surrounded him with people who loved him genuinely, friends who showed up for birthday parties, neighbors who dropped off casseroles when Ella had a difficult shift, a community built on mutual care and respect. I thought a lot about forgiveness during that time. I realized that forgiving my parents was not about excusing what they did. It was about releasing the hold their choices had on my heart. I did not forgive them for their sake. I forgave them for mine, so I could move forward without bitterness weighing me down. I also made a promise to myself. I would be the father I always wished I had. I would show up for every school play, every soccer game, every moment that mattered. Leo would never have to wonder if he was loved. He would know it every single day, without question. The lesson I learned from all of this is simple but powerful. Family is not just about blood. It is about presence. It is about choosing to be there when it counts. It is about showing up not just when it is convenient, but when it matters most. If you are watching this and you have ever felt like the forgotten child, the one who always came second, I want you to know something. You are not broken. You are not unworthy. You have every right to build a family of your own, one where you are loved and valued and seen. And walking away from people who cannot give you that is not selfish. It is survival. It is self-respect. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family to protect yourself or your children? Share your story in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for being here and listening to my story. I hope that wherever you are surrounded by people who choose you every single day. Take care of yourselves, and remember you deserve to be loved the right way.